There has been a resurgence of discourse and discussions in the Five Nights at Freddy's community as of late. Creators like FNaF, Pastra, Aya, and others have entered or re-entered the scene alongside OGs like MatPat, leading to some really fun and interesting theories, and even more so in my eyes, the video essays and retrospectives. Today, I decided to finally dip my toes back into the YouTube scene after being solely a short-form content creator on Instagram, to produce the first long-form video I have made in over 2 years. What better way to do that than with a retrospective video essay on the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise? Five Nights at Freddy's was, at its peak, a revolutionary game in the indie horror scene. However, just like any series, it has its flaws. Unlike some series, though, these flaws ultimately led to the downfall of the series and the dilution of its horror. This dilution of the horror elements in the series led the franchise away from its roots, originally a dark story covering disturbing topics, leading it to where it is now, essentially a thriller series with an oversaturated line of game and book titles. Scott Cawthon's oversaturation of the franchise convoluted the once vague and mysterious story, ruining it by adding unnecessary and quite frankly ridiculous plot points that take away from the heart of the series and what should have been the main focus of the series from the beginning. When critics of Scott Cawthon's game, Chipper & Sons Lumber Company, told Cawthon his characters looked like creepy animatronics that one would see at Chuck E. Cheese, Scott took the idea as a game and ran. Too far. The biggest issue with the series as a whole is the unnecessary over-convolution of the lore and the oversaturation of entries. This, in turn, diluted the horror of the series, effectively discrediting the integrity of the original story presented in the first entry of the series. Welcome everybody to How Five Nights at Freddy's Jump Scared the Shark. Five Nights at Freddy's quick success was a catalyst that led to its downfall. Many people seem to forget that Five Nights at Freddy's 1 was supposed to be Scott Cawthon's last attempt at being a game developer after a series of failures in the years prior. Because of this, the story of the series, in my eyes, was never fully fleshed out. FNaF 1, in my opinion, was the perfect FNaF game. It created an atmosphere that cannot be matched, and the effect the ambiance and gameplay had on horror games was something that was unlike any other for its time. The real star, in my eyes, however, was the story, and simultaneously the lack thereof. Five Nights at Freddy's 1 presented just enough story to provide answers that add to the gameplay. For example, the newspaper clippings detailing the missing children's incident that could be seen in the hallways. But it still left enough loose endings and room for theorizing and discussion, most notably the appearance of It's Me and Golden Freddy. In comparison to the rest of the series, the story of FNaF 1 was merely tidbits, an attribute that I feel partially led to its success. Not only was the game enjoyable to play and watch Let's Plays of, but it had mysteries that online communities could discuss together. When Markiplier released his Let's Play of Five Nights at Freddy's 1, it almost instantly blew up, skyrocketing the game to fame. I firmly believe that Scott hurried to release Five Nights at Freddy's 2 and 3 in order to protect the game's popularity and ensure that the hype didn't die down before he could release another title. In retrospect, I think having more time in between releases would have been extremely beneficial for the series. There was only a period of 94 days between the release of Five Nights at Freddy's 1 and FNaF 2, which, in my eyes, although not a professional opinion, was not enough time to fully flesh out the entirety of the story. It was maybe enough time to flesh out the vague ideas and fill them in as Scott went, but, as I'll touch on later in the video, it's clear that Scott was at least making some things up as he went, at least up until the retcon of the Five Nights at Freddy's 4 box and Dream Theory, which in my eyes was undeniably intended. The majority of people who have been in the fandom since the early days of the series would agree that the first 3 games made for a solid and satisfying trilogy. A more controversial opinion, however, would be that the series should have ended with Five Nights at Freddy's 3. The first game presented the main themes of the story, the newspaper clippings in the hallway highlighting the mystery, yet still allowing for enough questions to be answered to present a clear and concise story. The second game expanded on this idea, the introduction of William Afton the puppet, presenting the story of a murderer and his victim who wouldn't stop trying to protect the other children, even in death. For example, in the Save the minigame, when the puppet enlists Freddy's help, FNaF 2 also answers questions that were left unanswered in FNaF 1, such as how the animatronics were possessed in the first place in the Give Gifts, Give Life minigame. The third game tied up the important loose ends, killing William Afton and freeing the souls of the children during the Happiest Day minigame. Scott leaves plenty of room for theorizing. For example, the identity of the shadow animatronics, the culprit of the bite of 87, as well as the cliffhanger of if Springtrap really survived the fire, as seen if you brighten up the newspaper clippings at the end of Night 6. FNaF 1 through 3, as a trilogy, was a solid contribution to indie games, with a solid story and satisfying conclusion that left just enough room and enough mysteries for the community to theorize about for years to come. Scott's rush to release the first 4 games is where the downfall of the series is rooted, dooming the series from the start. Had Scott spaced out the releases of the games more than 205 days apart from the releases of FNaF 1 to the release of FNaF 3, perhaps the series would have panned out differently. FNaF 1 was supposed to be a standalone title until it blew up, FNaF 2 then coming along to act as a sequel, and 3 concluding the trilogy. After 3, however, there were complaints about FNaF 3's jump scares not being scary enough, which was a partial motivator into Scott releasing FNaF 4 just 143 days after the release of 3. Again, Scott had single-handedly developed a full title in 3 to 4 months after a previous game's release. The inherent rush to release FNaF 4, apparent by Scott's releasing of the game several months ahead of schedule, leads me to believe that Scott lost foresight and wasn't thinking clearly when releasing FNaF 4, and more importantly, the box. For those of y'all who don't know what the FNaF 4 box is, it is one of the most iconic unsolved mysteries of FNaF. It is widely believed that the original intention was for Five Nights at Freddy's 4 to confirm dream theory, the idea that the first 4 games are interconnected as a series of dreams and are not actual events. If y'all haven't seen MatPat's video on it, the evidence there is honestly undeniable, and I highly recommend you watch it. I'll link it in the iCard. Later on, Scott discussed in a Reddit post about how he decided to keep the box locked, stating, "What's in the box? It's the pieces put together. But the bigger question is, would the community accept it that way?" The fact that the pieces have remained elusive this time strikes me as incredible and special. A fitting conclusion in some ways, and because of that, I've decided that maybe some things are best left forgotten. Forever. This was August 24th of 2015, a little over a year after the release of FNaF 1. Scott clearly knew we as a community would not be satisfied with whatever was in that box. Again, most likely dream theory, which I attribute to the game being released much too early before Scott had time to truly sit and think on whether the story and its implications were what the fans wanted and if they were a good addition to the franchise. Here, I feel it is important to note that Scott had only been in the public eye for a little over a year. It is anticipated and expected that there was a learning curve to creating something for an eager and expectant audience, and of course, it's no hate. This is all just observations. However, I still feel Scott was too fast in giving us the first 3 sequels to Five Nights at Freddy's 1, and I feel most strongly about 4, seeing it was planned to release on Halloween of 2015, and it released July 23rd of 2015, 3 months early. Those 3 months could and should have been used to flesh out the rest of the story and ensure that Scott wanted Dream Theory, or whatever was actually in the box, to truly be what he wanted the story of FNaF to be. Scott rushing the release of Five Nights at Freddy's 4, and more importantly its story, was ultimately the reason that Scott had to not only retcon the box, but was also the reason that he had to release Sister Location, the game, as a whole. The Five Nights at Freddy's 4 box retcon was the moment the series began its nosedive. Because Scott rushed to release FNaF 4 and regretted the story he initially came up with, he had no choice but to release Sister Location, which in my eyes was a soft reboot of the series back to its paranormal roots, now with heavy sci-fi themes. If y'all don't think that Scott rushed FNaF 4, just look at FNaF World. FNaF World, released January 21st, 2016, was so disastrous as a whole, it wasn't just an aspect of the game that got retconned, it was the whole entire game. Scott had been so anxious to release another title for the series that he released something he wasn't proud of, so much so that he talked about how he wasn't proud of it and talked about how he decided that the game was not canon, even though originally it was supposed to be. It's here, during FNaF World's retconning, that I truly think Scott took a step back and realized he needed to slow down and think about his next step, which is why it was over a year after the release of Five Nights at Freddy's 4 that Sister Location was released. This is 4 times as long as the times in between the other games. Scott had to work on doing damage control and had to work to fill the holes that were blown open when he decided to retcon Dream Theory and whatever was in the box. If FNAF 4 hadn't been made and released so hastily, Sister Location would not have been needed to fix what FNAF 4 broke, and Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator would not have been needed either, as it was a game that tied up the loose ends in FNAF's Sister Location. It is the simultaneous dragging on and rushing of the series that I feel is one of, if not Five Nights at Freddy's biggest flaw. The series manages to drag itself on for 9 main titles, not including AR or World, convoluting a story that was never fully fleshed out to begin with due to the hasty nature of the rushed releases that took place during FNAF 2 through 4. Five Nights at Freddy's has single-handedly continued a completed story twice over, not including the soft reboots that come in the forms of making the game's actual games present in universe, and then basically retconning the entirety of the first 4 games. Scott made stuff up as he went for so long that the only way for the series to have some semblance of coherency in today's age was for him to retcon at least some aspects of the first 4 games in the series at the same time. All of this could have been avoided if he hadn't released not only so many games, but the books as well. Please, somebody enlighten me and tell me why it makes sense to have had books that take place in the same universe as the games, but in a different continuity. I know that the original purpose of the books was to provide answers about the universe and the way things worked. Heck, we get William Afton's name revealed in the Silver Eyes before Sister Location's release. However, as of writing this, there are 19 FNAF books, and most, in my opinion, make things worse for the games, not better. Again, using my example above, in Tales from the Pizzaplex number 2, Haps, there is an entire story dedicated to essentially retconning almost all of the first 4 games, or at least making us question everything up until that point. What is the purpose of completing the story in FNAF 3, deciding to release 4 Sister Location, and recompleting the story in Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, with Ultimate Custom Night acting as an epilogue, only to then release VR, which, don't get me wrong, is an excellent title, but it brings William back from the dead for a 3rd time, and then releasing Security Breach, which brings him back again for a 4th time, only to then retcon the first 4 games to some extent as a way to soft reboot the series again, which already happened after the box incident. Why not create a new story with a new villain in the same universe? For example, Vanny, who was built up for 2.5 years during VR and AR before the release of Security Breach? Yeah, she was introduced in early 2019. Matt Pat's line about some of the books and how ridiculous the story and the ideas introduced in them say it best.
People hate when I talk about the books. The books tell you the rough guidelines or rough rules of the universe. Then, to take it one insane logical step further and say, not only are they building robotic versions of kids, but multiple versions of robotic kids at different ages, I would say you are insane. That's so stupid. It is a weird thing for them to do, and it challenges realism to such an absurd degree.
Yeah.
That you're like, yeah, and no one's noticing that this person that they're interacting with and that bleeds, again, because they bleed in the books, that bleeds, no one is noticing that this person doesn't age, but is still also eating in order to survive, but is also like perfectly passable as a human in every other way, shape, and form. That's crazy. And then the books layer on, and it's also Baby, who is a robot clown. And you're like, that's so stupid. I feel like no wonder people think that the theories that we produce are insane, because it is, but we're just telling you what the books say.
Welcome.
The ideas originally introduced in the first game have been completely ruined by the oversaturation of entries now in the present form of the series. In my eyes, there is barely any solid connection to the first game anymore, minus the characters and the vague themes due to how many times the story has been changed, retconned, or straight up covered up and written over. Scott effectively managed to erase all the love that went into the early titles in an attempt to keep a dying series alive. And I hate to say that it's dying, but it is. Or at least the original story. Again, there are so many different stories you could tell with new characters that haven't already died. Yes, the Security Breach DLC and the movie are coming out, but I'm concerned that it's mostly going to pile more random information and story bits on top of the corpse of the original story and further saturate the series with random information that drags it down. It's not to say that I don't enjoy the theories people are making, and I genuinely love seeing the community so active with each other, but I wish this wasn't the mess of a story that we're trying to untangle. I don't think saying Five Nights at Freddy's 1 through Ultimate Custom Night should have been one story, and VR onwards another is an unpopular opinion by any means. However, my other opinions might be, such as that William Afton should have died and stayed dead the first time, there should be no glitch trap or burn trap, and Vanny should have been an independent villain that has actual screen time and security breach, that isn't just her skipping around and being completely and utterly not scary at all. I firmly believe that this series single-handedly killed itself by trying to keep itself alive. It kept injecting itself with more and more lore remnant that now, just like Molten Freddy, it is a tangled, messy, confused conglomerate of story fragments that don't go together. There are two halves that are being forced together that just don't fit. Let the original story rest. It was solid, it had a good conclusion, and it had decent character arcs. The rest of it was fine as is in the 2017 to 2018 era. It didn't need to be drawn out and written over time and time again. It was fine as is. Retconning things is not going to make the story better. It's only made it worse.
It is here that I'd like to welcome the creator of I Do Not Like Sister Location, fellow creator, yeah. I'm super excited and grateful that he was able to join me for this project. Definitely go watch his Sister Location video if you haven't seen it already. It's extremely well thought out and a super good watch, and I totally have listened to it like 3 times. Anyways, yeah.
Hey everyone, glad to be here. This is something we've coined the Afton effect, named after its two best examples, William and Michael Afton. The Afton effect is essentially the improper utilization of character, which leads to a significant lack of balance between characters and their arms, effectively either ruining the character or missing the mark. William and Michael Afton are perfect examples of this issue in the series. Where William is overutilized, Michael is underutilized. William Afton was the perfect antagonist in the beginning. We knew what he did, but we didn't know exactly who he was. His introduction in FNaF 2 was disturbing to watch through the lens of 8-bit minigames. Seeing his crimes unfold in front of us in detail that was simultaneously so vague, yet so explicit. There was something so deeply sinister about even something as simple as an 8-bit purple man standing in a corner smiling that made him an excellent antagonist. When he was introduced as Springtrap in FNaF 3, there was a layer of mystery as to who and what exactly he was that was chilling. Springtrap was the perfect villain. The slow build leading up to the reveal that showed who and what exactly Springtrap was drawn out perfectly. The cutscenes in between nights only revealing small amounts of information that wasn't made clear until the end. After beating Night 5, Springtrap was revealed to be William Afton, the purple guy, and after Night 6, when Fazbear Frights burns down, William is dead. Well, that is if we ignore him being in the background of the newspaper article. He suffered for years as Springtrap, only to be burned and die in the end. This, alongside the pairing of the Happiest Day minigame, was the perfect arc for William. One can argue the same for Pizza Sim's ending, with William finally burning after years of evading Henry. Although some may have preferred if William died at the end of FNaF 3 instead, Pizza Sim still has a satisfying conclusion that wraps up William's character arc perfectly. It's here after Pizza Sim, although Pizza Sim is where William's character kinda starts to become a joke, where the Afton effect occurs, and William becomes grossly overused. William evades death when getting trapped in Springtrap, after FNaF 3, and in Pizza Sim, now coming back in VR as Glitch Trap, and then again as Burn Trap. He evades death and comes back 5 times, and we don't know if he's still alive at the end of Security Breach because the ending is so ambiguous. We never see him die, so he very well could be alive and come back for a 6th time in the DLC. After this, he quickly goes from a disturbing villain to a complete joke, simply being watered down to Peepaw Willie and the I always come back meme. This terrible utilization of William dilutes any horror factors the character once had. How is an old decrepit rabbit man who's died and come back 5 times scary anymore? There was something disturbing about his first time evading death, fusing with and living in the very suit he committed his atrocities in. But after 5 times though, this concept has lost its effect. He's just not scary anymore, which is such a shame, as he was a great character in the beginning. The opposite can be said for Michael Afton, who has so much wasted potential. His introduction in Sister Location set him up as an excellent protagonist, a son, attempting to pay retribution on behalf of his serial killer father, chasing after William in an attempt to end things once and for all. However, where William has the problem of being unable to stay dead, Michael dies way too soon. All the potential he has is ruined because he dies at the end of FNaF 6 and doesn't come back. And no, we're not going into the theory that Michael's soul is in Glamrock Freddy, alright? That's controversial enough, we'll leave it at that. That point aside, it's really unfortunate that Michael really could have been a prominent protagonist other than his appearance in Pizza Sim. He's there and then he dies. But William lives again. It especially sucks because there was so much Scott could have done with Michael in Pizza Sim that was completely overlooked. One idea that came up during the writing process for this video was for Scott to concretely reveal that Michael was responsible for the FNaF 3 fire and the happiest day, and or confirming that Michael was in fact going to each location and picking up all of the pieces. It's something that could have been revealed in a minigame in Pizza Sim, much like in the security puppet minigame, and it would have added so much more depth to Michael's character. William and Michael's character arcs, if you can even call them character arcs, are unbalanced, with each character having horrible utilization. William much more so than Michael, but both are pretty mediocre, which ruins both of them as the protagonist and antagonist. The Afton effect can be applied to other characters in the series as well, which we won't go into, but some include Henry, Baby, Vanny/Vanessa, and the Glamrocks. Maybe it's something that can be looked in depth at in the future. Anyway, that's all for me. Thanks for having me on. I've been yeah, and I'll see you all later.
To summarize everything, even though I love Five Nights at Freddy's, there are several aspects of the series that missed the mark in my eyes. I miss the old days of the series when there were only a few games out and when the lore wasn't so convoluted. There are just too many games and books now, which makes the already complicated lore even harder to follow, and makes it so much less scary than it once was. Not everything in the series should have or needs an explanation. Characters like William Afton highlight just how diluted the horror has become and how a ton of aspects in the series have become jokes or memes. Let me emphasize that while it is unfortunate that the series has gone off the rails lore-wise, that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy the series and that you can't or shouldn't enjoy it either. I thoroughly enjoy the discourse, discussions, and theories in the community and wouldn't have made this video if I didn't love the series. I want to give another huge thank you to yeah for joining me on this project. He's an amazing creator and deserves all the love he gets and more. Again, please go watch his sister location video. It's awesome. That's all for me today. I'll eventually be back for another video. I'm not sure when, but definitely look out for it. I hope y'all enjoyed this. Let me know y'all's opinions in the comments, and I cannot wait to see y'all's thoughts on this. Bye!